In the glittering halls of a billionaire's mansion, power and prestige hung in the air like perfume. Guests from every corner of the world had gathered. Ambassadors, CEOs, royals, and dignitaries. They came not just for business, but for the honor of being seen in the presence of Sheikh Karim Al-Fahad, a man whose wealth and influence shaped entire industries. But tonight, it wasn't gold or deals that would shock the crowd. It was a test. With a sudden shift in mood, the sheikh leaned forward, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Then, without warning, he asked a question, not in English, not in French, but in flawless Arabic. The room froze. No one moved. No one answered. And then, an unexpected voice, soft yet steady, broke the silence. Yeah, it wasn't from a politician or a business tycoon. It was the maid's daughter. And in that moment, the entire room stopped breathing. The evening sun dipped low over the desert horizon, painting the sky in strokes of crimson and gold. Sheikh Karim's estate stood like a palace, tall marble pillars, cascading fountains, and chandeliers visible through towering windows. Tonight's gathering was more than just a dinner. It was a stage where the world's most powerful men and women would seek favor, approval, and alliances. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, valets rushing to open doors for guests draped in silk gowns and tailored suits. Inside, the air smelled of exotic spices and roses, music from a live string quartet echoing softly against marble walls. The sheikh himself, dressed in a pristine white thobe with a golden trim, stood like a king at the center of it all, warm smiles concealing a mind sharp as a blade. Waiters moved swiftly, carrying trays of delicacies, saffron rice, lamb skewers, fresh dates. Among them were house staff, dressed neatly in uniforms, moving like shadows to keep the evening flawless. Among those shadows was Leila, the maid's daughter. She was no guest, no heiress, no dignitary. She had been granted permission by her mother to quietly observe from the corner of the grand hall, a rare privilege since she often helped with minor tasks. Leila, barely 17, wore a simple dress, her hair tied neatly back. While others sparkled in diamonds, she remained unnoticed, as if invisible. But her eyes, they were alive. She didn't just see chandeliers and gowns. She saw the layers beneath, the arrogance of the rich, the nervous energy of investors, the subtle power struggles disguised in smiles. As the evening unfolded, the sheikh gave his speech of welcome, his deep voice commanding silence. He spoke in English for the benefit of his guests, talking of unity, progress, and partnerships. The crowd applauded politely, raising their glasses in unison. Yet something in his eyes hinted that the night had more in store. The sheikh leaned back in his seat, fingers drumming lightly on the golden armrest. Then, almost casually, he shifted. His tone deepened, his gaze sharpened, and without any warning, he asked a question, direct, precise, in Arabic. The words cut through the air like a blade. The music halted. Conversations died mid-sentence. The waiters froze in place. Silence swallowed the hall. Every guest stared blankly. Some shifted uncomfortably, others lowered their eyes. It was a simple question, yet in Arabic it was indecipherable to them. The sheikh's lips curled faintly, testing, observing. He had expected this. But what he did not expect was the voice that answered. The silence stretched across the grand hall, like a tightening rope. The sheikh's question, spoken in perfect Arabic, hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. His eyes, dark and commanding, scanned the room as though piercing through the very souls of his guests. Not a single dignitary moved. Not a single CEO dared to answer. They shifted in their chairs, exchanged nervous glances, and fidgeted with their glasses of wine. Some tried to smile it off, others pretended not to notice, but all of them were exposed. The test was working. For Sheikh Karim, this was not merely a question, it was a measure of depth. These were people who claimed to understand his culture, his people, his heritage, yet in this moment they stood paralyzed, their ignorance revealed under the golden lights of his palace. His lips curled in a faint smirk. He enjoyed the discomfort, the crack in their polished facades. And then, like a spark in the darkness, a voice rose. It was soft, hesitant, but clear. The words flowed in fluent Arabic, delicate yet precise. The answer was correct, more than correct. It was respectful, carrying the tone of someone who understood not only the language, but the culture embedded within it. Every head in the hall turned, eyes narrowing in disbelief. The voice hadn't come from a suited diplomat or a jeweled heiress. It hadn't come from the polished lips of a global CEO. No. It came from the corner of the room, where the maid's daughter stood quietly in her simple dress. Leila, her heart raced in her chest, pounding so loudly she thought the world could hear it. She hadn't planned to speak. She hadn't even thought her voice would carry across the marble hall. But the question had struck her. An instinct had taken over. For her, Arabic was not foreign. It was the language her mother had spoken to her since birth, the language of lullabies and whispered prayers. The crowd gasped audibly. So hard, a murmur spread like wildfire. Guests leaned in, whispering to one another in disbelief. Who is she? Did the maid's daughter just answer him? Impossible. The mocking undertones were there, but beneath them ran something else. Shock, awe, curiosity. The Sheikh's smirk vanished. His eyes locked onto Leila like a hawk spotting its prey. He leaned forward in his chair, studying her with newfound interest. The air thickened as he repeated his question, this time more complex, layered with idioms only a native speaker could understand. His tone was sharper, challenging, almost daring her to respond. Leila's lips trembled, but she found her voice again. Slowly, carefully, she spoke the answer. Her accent was flawless. Her confidence grew with each word. And when she finished, the hall was so silent that even the fountains in the courtyard seemed to hush. The Sheikh's eyes widened, not in anger, but in intrigue. Around him, powerful men and women who commanded empires suddenly felt like children caught cheating on an exam. And standing there, the maid's daughter, invisible moments ago, had become the center of the world. The test had shifted. What began as a measure of arrogance among the powerful had turned into a revelation, one no one had expected. The hall remained frozen, every pair of eyes fixed on Leila. The chandelier above seemed to glow brighter, casting her in a spotlight she never asked for. For a girl who had spent her life unnoticed, carrying trays, pouring water, cleaning the footprints of the rich, this sudden attention felt like a wave threatening to drown her. Her fingers curled tightly against her dress, but her eyes didn't falter. The Sheikh leaned back in his ornate chair, his jeweled hand stroking his chin. He was a man accustomed to control, to the obedience of rooms full of leaders, to the silence of those too afraid to challenge him. Yet here stood a girl, a maid's daughter, speaking his mother tongue with fluency that not even his most trusted associates could manage. The irony wasn't lost on him. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Their world was built on appearances, on being the smartest and most resourceful in any room. Yet in this moment, their wealth, their education, and their confidence meant nothing. They had all failed a test that a maid's daughter had passed with ease. The humiliation stung, and in their hearts, envy sparked. One man, a silver-haired executive from New York, cleared his throat, attempting to break the silence. Well, Sheikh Karim, surely the child only repeated something she has overheard. His words faltered as the Sheikh's gaze sliced toward him like a blade. The man stopped speaking instantly, his face flushing red. Leila, meanwhile, stood straighter, her chest rising and falling with quick breaths. She didn't know what came over her. She only knew she couldn't stay silent when the Sheikh's question echoed in her ears. Arabic was her heritage, a gift from her late grandmother, who had insisted that Leila never forget where she came from, even if the world around her tried to make her feel small. Your name, Sheikh Karim finally said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of command. Leila, she answered softly, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. The Sheikh's lips pressed into a thin line, unreadable. Leila, he repeated as if testing the shape of it on his tongue. Oh, do you know what you've done? Her pulse quickened. I only answered your question, Your Excellency. The crowd gasped again at her boldness. This was not how one addressed a sheikh, but Leila wasn't being defiant. She was simply being honest. The sheikh rose slowly from his chair, his robes cascading like waves as he took a step toward her. Every person in the hall seemed to hold their breath. The power dynamic had shifted entirely, and no one knew where this was heading. For the first time in her life, Leila was not invisible. She was not the background to someone else's story. She was the story. The echo of the sheikh's footsteps filled the marble hall as he approached Leila. Each step was deliberate, the sound resonating with authority. The crowd parted slightly, instinctively lowering their head. This was no longer the sheikh who had been toying with powerful men. This was the ruler, the judge, the man whose very presence demanded submission. Leila's throat tightened, but she stood her ground. Her mother, standing at the far side of the hall, pressed her hands together, silently praying her daughter would not be punished for her courage. The sheikh stopped just a few feet away, his tall frame casting a shadow over her. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, studied her face with the intensity of someone searching for a hidden truth. "So," he said, his deep voice rolling across the room, "you are not afraid to speak when no one else dares." Leila's lips trembled, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "I wasn't trying to challenge anyone, Your Excellency. I only knew the answer." The sheikh tilted his head slightly, intrigued. "Anyone can memorize words, but understanding, that is different." His hand rose, and a servant quickly brought forward a small leather-bound book. The sheikh opened it with care and then looked back at Leila. "If your knowledge is genuine, prove it. Translate this passage, not just the words, but the meaning." The crowd stirred with excitement. This was no longer a mere question. It was a test of intellect, culture, and wisdom. Many of the guests leaned in, eager to see her stumble, to reassure themselves that her earlier brilliance was only luck. Leila swallowed hard as the sheikh handed her the book. The Arabic text flowed in elegant calligraphy, lines rich with proverbs and layered meanings. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it, the weight of 100 stairs pressing down on her shoulders. She took a breath. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "A language is not just words, Leila. It is the soul of a people. If you speak with honesty, you will always be understood." Lifting her eyes to the sheikh, she began. Her voice was soft at first but grew steadier with each line. She didn't just translate word for word. She explained the wisdom behind the passage, weaving in its cultural depth, its history, its poetry. Her words painted images of ancient deserts, the struggle for honor, and the eternal bond of family. The hall was silent. Even those who wished to see her fail found themselves drawn into her explanation. She wasn't merely reciting, she was breathing life into the text. When she finished, the sheikh closed the book himself. He said nothing for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The tension was unbearable. The tension was unbearable. Then slowly, a smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "You speak," he said, "and not as a servant's daughter, but as someone who carries heritage in her blood." Gasps rippled through the hall. Leila felt her knees weaken, but she refused to bow. Something inside her had awakened. For the first time, the sheikh wasn't just testing her. He was acknowledging her. The golden glow of the chandeliers reflected off the polished marble, but the atmosphere inside the hall was anything but warm. Every guest could feel the weight of what had just happened. A maid's daughter, invisible to their eyes minutes ago, had just spoken with more authority and grace than any of them could muster. The sheikh's smile lingered, but behind it was a sharp, unspoken challenge. He wasn't done. He turned, his robe flowing like a wave, and faced the crowd. "Do you see?" he said, his voice booming, each word echoing against the high ceiling. "A power is not in the titles you carry. It is not in your wealth, your suits, your polished speeches. It lies in knowledge. It lies in authenticity. And tonight, none of you had the courage to answer, except her." Murmurs spread across the hall, tinged with both shame and resentment. Some avoided the sheikh's eyes, their faces flushed with embarrassment. Others glared at Leila with thinly veiled envy. How could someone so ordinary have stolen the moment from them? The sheikh turned back to Leila. Tell me, child," he asked, "why did you answer when so many others chose silence?" Leila's heart pounded, but she spoke with honesty. "Because silence would have been disrespectful. My grandmother taught me that when you understand truth, you must honor it by speaking it." The sheikh's eyes softened at her words. For the first time, his imposing presence seemed to shift, not into weakness, but into recognition. Here was someone who reminded him of the very values his own ancestors had lived by. A man from the back of the room, one of the foreign dignitaries, finally dared to speak. His tone dripped with condescension. "With respect, Your Excellency, she is just a servant's child. Surely we cannot hold her answer above the silence of those more qualified." The hall tensed. All eyes darted to the sheikh, waiting to see how he would respond. His gaze turned icy. He took a slow step toward the man, his voice cold but controlled. "A qualified?" he repeated. "You, who claim to understand my people, my culture, but cannot answer the simplest question in our language. And yet you believe this child is beneath you. No, tonight it is you who are beneath her." The man fell silent, his pride crushed beneath the sheikh's words. The crowd shifted again, whispers buzzing like a hive. Some began to nod in reluctant agreement. Others watched Leila with newfound respect. The sheikh raised his hand, silencing the noise. He looked at Leila once more. "You have spoken truth when others cowered. You have honored wisdom when others chased appearances. Remember this night, Leila, for though you may see yourself as small, the world will not forget what you've done here. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she held them back. This was no dream. This was her reality. And in that moment, standing beneath the golden lights of the Sheikh's palace, Leila understood. Her life would never be the same again. The hall slowly came back to life, but the mood had shifted forever. The guests who once carried themselves with arrogance now stood humbled, their expensive suits and gowns suddenly feeling like masks stripped away. The Sheikh, still towering with authority, dismissed the gathering with a wave of his hand. But the lesson he had delivered through Leila would linger far longer than the glittering night. Leila's mother rushed to her, clutching her daughter's hands tightly. Tears welled in her eyes, not of fear but of pride. For years, she had shielded Leila from the harshness of their world, teaching her in whispers, reminding her of their roots. Tonight the seeds she had planted had bloomed before the eyes of kings and billionaires. As the hall emptied, a few curious guests stole glances at Leila, no longer as a servant's daughter, but as someone extraordinary. Some whispered with admiration, others with unease, but no one could deny the truth. She had spoken when they could not. The Sheikh paused before leaving, turning once more to her. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of prophecy. But do not forget who you are, Leila. The world will try to make you small again. Never let it succeed. With that, he left, his robes trailing behind him like shadows of history. Leila stood there, trembling but unbroken. She was still the maid's daughter, yes, but now she was something more, a symbol of courage, proof that truth spoken with heart could silence the powerful. And though she didn't know where life would lead her next, one thing was certain: this night was not the end of her story. It was the beginning.